Today we are going to talk about social network analysis, and I would like to talk a bit more research designs of network studies. And the outline of our lecture is the following. Firstly, we would say a couple of words about the importance of these topics in wider computational social science agenda. Then we would talk on also just a couple of words about the difference between traditional data and network data. And then we would move to 4 different studies applying different techniques and methodologies from network analysis to very different subjects. And I hope it would be interesting to find out how our graph theory methods, how these methodological and mathematical instruments can be applied to completely different cases and subjects. I would finish the lecture with a set of recommended literature, resources, and just useful links. And then I hope this presentation would be available and you can then just browse these links if you need them. Okay, I hope that our lecture would take about 55 minutes, and then we would have some time to discuss the networks. Okay, let's go. And okay. Oh no, I'm sorry. My notebook is a bit frozen. Okay, and do you see it or? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, is it fine or it isn't fine to view it in such way?
It's okay. I think that we see the slides network definition.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, let's move. Firstly, what is the network? Social network is usually defined as a finite set or sets of actors and their relation or a set of relationship between them. Thus, this is a very common definition of social networks. And if you also open the textbook from graph theory, it would also say you that a graph is consists of a set of actors or nodes or vertices and relationships or ties or nodes between them. So over here we have 2 different sets of units. Firstly, we have individuals, and of course it can be not only individuals, it can be organizations, groups, it can be countries, it can be users of social media, it can be very different subjects, and objects. And we also have relationship between them. So we know that these guys are associated by some link, and these links can be also very different. This can be financial flows between 2 banks. It can be the network of sanctions between states, and very many other different relationships, such as friendship, emotional closeness, collaboration, and different other relationships. And traditional data, we can also call it raw data. It is usually collected by surveys or by other mechanisms of data collection. But as a sociologist, we used to collect data by surveys, and usually these data are aggregated in such a level. So here I put one of the most famous machine learning data set, Titanic, which shows us guys, which describes guys who were on Titanic and who survived or not. And so for each of these individuals, each row corresponds. So all of us know it, how this data is recorded. The network data is recorded in completely different way. There are multiple mechanisms of network data collection and storage. And I would like to highlight here that actual network data, they're special. They usually stored as an adjacency matrix or an edge list. And what do we store? Actually, we store information about the relationship between actors. And it's important to highlight here that network data are relational data, and this relationship might be very different. There might be different type of relationships at the same moment. This relationship might be valued or not. We also should know that networks require special mechanisms of data collection and processing due to this very special structure. And we also should take into details that network-related information might include multiple data sets. So if we collect data about network, we should collect information about network and relationship between actors, as well as information about actors. So it makes network studies difficult, time and resource consuming, of course, but it's worth it. And what actually scholars usually study when they study the networks? There can be a very long list of potential research questions, and I put here only 3 of them, but they're very, very rich. Each of them is very rich. One of the directions that is very popular in very many areas is the relationship between the position of an actor in social networks and his or her outcomes. Another 2 research questions are focused not on the impact of the network position on the individual, rather than on the structure, evolution, and functioning of this network, which is also considered as by researchers as a complex social system, which has some specific structural mechanisms and which is evolving over time following very different mechanisms. And let's move to let's move to more concrete case studies. And in frames of our discussion of the case studies, I would like to start from network studies based on survey data. And over here, of course, I should say that survey network studies based on surveys started long before computational social science era, and many popular surveys which even now we can use for different purposes were collected almost half of a century ago. And these surveys, they can be they usually completed on 2 levels. Firstly, this is a survey within a given community. So researchers collect the network information from nodes for a single bounded population, such as classroom, company, or other not very big organizational units. Or such big surveys can be completed also on a level larger. For example, in frames of this presentation, we would examine the questions about network-related questions from general social survey. Okay, let's move to the first case, the evolution of the network. All the papers that I'm discussing here, you can find the reference in the bottom of the slide. And then you can follow these references. Network evolution is one of the interesting topics, as I said before, and in frames of this research, which was very recently published in PNAS, a very good journal by Christoph Stadtfeld and his colleagues. In frames of this study, scholars examined the relationship between the network structure and academic achievements of students. And in here, the size of the sample actually was relatively modest. Colleagues collected information about one cohort of first-year undergraduate students from ETH Zurich, and the number of the size of the sample was 226 students. But for these students, researchers collected very detailed network information. Every 2 or every 1 month, at different time points, this data collection, the difference between periods was a bit varied. Anyway, they collected during their first year of studies, they collected 5 waves of social network ties and individual characteristics. How it was done? They made a survey in Qualtristic, and every 6 or 7 weeks, they sent these links to their sample and then asked respondents to fill these questionnaires. In these questionnaires, students were asked to nominate their friends, the individuals who collaborate with them on study-related issues, individuals with whom they have advice relationships, and other very many network-related questions. As far as I remember, they also asked students to nominate individuals with whom they have difficulties in relationships. So overall, they have 5 sets of the network, 5 sets of the networks that were completed in these periods. Also, researchers collected information about academic performance of the individuals, as well as they also collected some additional information during the surveys. For example, information about their well-being, their depression, and other variables. They do not consider this particular research question in frames of this paper, but as you might find further, they also have this data. So from the data collection point of view, it was really a very difficult period of data collection, and every 6 or 7 weeks, researchers collected this network data. And what did they do with that data? They did 2 models. In the frames of first model, they traced the evolution of 2 networks. The first network was friendship network, and the second one was study together network, so academic collaboration. And they asked a question, how people study together. And it turns out that students were most likely to start studying with someone that they already consider as a friend. And interesting that they found very weak evidence for the reverse process, that study partners are more likely to become friends. So you are more likely to become study partners with friends and less likely to start friends with your study partners. And interesting also that multiplex relationships, so being friends with your study partners, were more stable than being either friends or study partner. Thus, these results suggest that students tend to create these positive multiplex social relationships with their peers and within this community. And second, they did they did just a simple OLS model, and they correlated the performance, the academic performance of students with other variables, and found that successful students have a high number of incoming ties in each network and more likely to be named as a study partner by someone else. And this outcome suggests that being involved in this network is positively associated with academic performance. So let's now move to this video. And in this short video, you can find how the network of students evolve over time. So it is first survey, then we see that the number of interactions between individuals increase and the number of studying ties increased a lot. Then we see how we see that in here a lot of individuals are on the peripheries. These guys do not participate in this network. And we find that here is some densely connected core, that some individuals create these very highly connected groups. And that's the end of, after the 8 months of observation, we find this structure. And on this structure, we see that in here, students are connected with very many ties that corresponds to study ties as well as friendship ties. And we might also see some community formation within this network. So we see this one group within the network and this one group within the network. Okay. Okay. The important moment of this study, of not only of one of the papers, but also of all the study, is that authors very documented the details of their research, very attentive in very concrete details. They covered all methodological and practical issues that might be important for people who also would like to make something else to collect data in a similar way. And I think that it is a very good practice to make some documentation. They published this paper in Social Networks journal. Here is the link. Authors very detailed covered the steps of the data collection, organizational issue. They said how many money they paid for students as a financial compensation for filling their questionnaires. They discussed data quality because, as we might expect, over time the response rate decreased. Thus, it is very important to pay additional attention to the quality of the data. And one of the most important notes to my mind was that at some point they couldn't collect information from social media and social media networks of the individuals due to the European Union restrictions. At the moment of the data preparation of the project, they could collect this information, and after they start working on it, they were not able to collect this data due to European Union restrictions. And it is also important to have in mind that such measures can be at each time point, that they can be introduced by government. And as we discussed in our first day of our school, it is important all the time to have in mind that these digital traces, these ethical issues, they're at the moment of discussion. Okay. Next, let's move to a bit different surveys. In this survey, we collected information about one small community. And our results give us information about only one community. Yes, we know that it is good to be socially integrated. If you are socially integrated, you are more likely to be socially integrated in both study network and friendship network. But we do not actually know whether these mechanisms they work not only within this given community. Maybe this ETH Zurich is one very special case. And this is actually the problem of the social network studies, because we usually concentrate on one particular network. But some approaches allow us to study larger populations. And one of these approaches is core discussion network. In this study, in this presentation, we would discuss the paper about core discussion network of Americans. But as I know, in different countries, researchers also cover the core discussion networks of their countries. I know that there are some studies about Japan and Netherlands and maybe some other countries. And what is core discussion network? This is a very short question. With whom do you discuss important matters over the last 6 months? You know, this is a very simple question and people can answer it. And the first study of this network was completed in 1985 in frames of general social survey. And this question was in frames of this population survey. Respondents were asked to nominate individuals with whom they discussed important matters over the last 6 months. And then on the first 5 persons, if an individual named more than 5 persons for the 5 persons, otherwise for all persons, respondent should interpret the role of these individuals and describe them. For what he or she should describe their relationship between first 5 nominated individuals. For example, whether they do not know at all or whether they are very tightly connected with each other. And he also should provide information about whole CDN. For each of the nominated individual, he should say age, gender, education, and kinship with him. For example, if you nominate your mother or your father or your daughter, you should say that this is kin relationship. Otherwise, if you nominate your lawyer, you can say that it is not kin to me. Yes, and it is interesting that in terms of this research, we can make conclusions about the structure of personal networks, about these core discussion networks on the whole population. And here are some results. Some interesting results. Nearly a quarter of Americans have very limited number of close individuals, and majority of us support it from 2 to 5. such close ties. The mode is 3. We have both a half of kin and half of non-kin contacts, and our networks are usually densely connected. In general, different are greatest for subgroups defined by age and education. Network size as well as diversity drops with the age, and density rises with the age. So individuals who are older, they tend to support more kin networks with their relatives, so they interact with their kids, grandkids, spouses, and they usually do not tend to support close relationships with very different people. They usually try to be more conservative in these terms, while more educated people support larger networks, more diverse networks, and they tend to increase their networks both due to kin and non-kin contacts. I think that this core discussion network is a very useful and very easy question, very easy network question, and it actually shows us a lot about the general population, which is really very interesting, and we cannot collect such information in frames of usual network research. As far as I know, still the number of such studies is about 20, maybe 30. In computational social science, there are very limited number of such studies that examine such networks of the general population. And I think that it might be very interesting to somehow associate the core discussion network approach with some computational social science data collection mechanisms. And I would think that it might be very interesting studies. Interesting also that core discussion network was studied 20 years later after this data collection, and researchers found the increase in number of social isolates. So more Americans reported that they have 0 or 1 core contact. Anyway, I think that this direction might be very important in terms of social support, and I think that in COVID pandemic, this core discussion network would be the core resource of the social support for many of us. Okay, and we are moving from surveys to observations of the network behavior. If you have any questions about surveys, you can ask. Please also ask in chat, or you can interrupt me if you do not understand something. Okay. And let's, let's move to observations. We are moving, firstly, we were discussing how to collect network data about individuals, and in observations, and I would like to talk a bit more how we can actually construct not social but also network and use it in a very interesting research design. This paper, it was completed by psychologists, and it was published in one of the best computational social science also journals, Nature Human Behavior. In frames of this study, researchers would like to capture the curiosity styles, and they recruited 100.5 participants to explore and study the patterns of Wikipedia exploring. Researchers suggest that we build our knowledge in two different ways. Firstly, busybody. These are individuals who prefer to sample diverse concepts characterized by distraction and never dwelling anywhere. So these individuals are searching for different and not related to each other concepts. And in contrast to busybodies, they identify hunters, and these individuals, they prefer to search for closely connected concepts and study everything about these concepts. And these two big different groups were suggested to be quantified and identified by network analysis. So these are different types of curiosity behavior were suggested to represent distinct concepts of networks of browsing. Let's move to this picture to make it easier to identify. So hunters on the top, these guys, they're more likely to study one particular concept and then browse into the pages in Wikipedia pages that are related to this particular concept. For example, if I would like to study something about social networks, and then I would move to graph theory, then I would move to mathematics, then I would move to computer science, and then I would move around these very closely connected group of pages about one concrete topic. I would be a hunter who is searching about one particular concept. And this network would be characterized by high clustering. So I would search for very closely connected with each other pages. And these pages would be similar each other in terms of terms. I'm sorry. So if the page would contain very similar if this page contained very similar information, it would be these pages would be considered as closely related to each other. In contrast, busybodies would be guys who are searching for different terms which are weakly connected to each other. For example, firstly, I decided to read something about computational social science, and then I saw Trump. I jumped to Trump, and then I saw that Trump is writing something about Twitter. I read something about Twitter and something like this. So we have these different strategies, and Linden and Staley they recruited 148 participants. Firstly, they provided them to complete the survey about their curiosity. And then they asked them to complete the survey. After completing the survey, they explored Wikipedia, and these colleagues collected information about Wikipedia surfing. So this information was based only on Wikipedia search. It was not, they didn't examine whether they shifted to other sites or something like this. It was just the random box on Wikipedia pages. I'm sorry, I should clarify in chat. Okay.
Yeah, I've already
Okay.
got it. Yeah.
Okay, yes. And then for each Wikipedia page was treated as a distinct concept on a node in the knowledge network, and then using natural language processing determine whether these two nodes in the networks are closely connected or not to each other. And what was interesting in this study, that these network metrics that they suggested, this path lengths and clustering, it was correlated with curiosity. The authors used 5-dimensional curiosity scale to measure it, which means that we actually support the hypothesis that individuals who were hunters, according to the survey, they also used Wikipedia as hunters. So they also read a lot about the same concepts. And they really were concentrated on some particular topics. And busybodies who were not as concentrated as hunters, they also randomly walked across different domains in the Wikipedia. They also suggested that they also studied the deprivation sensitivity. This is one of the composite measures of the curiosity, and they found out that it is described by the network features on 20%. So in their model, they described 20% of the variance. And they also found that social curiosity is negatively associated with average clustering coefficient. I also said about it before. And overall, they said that they suggested this hypothesis. So on the one hand, they completed, on the one hand, they propose this methodology, and on the other hand, they support their measures, their network measures, with the results of the survey. I think it is a very interesting study, and I call it observational study because at this moment in this research, actually, scientists, they do not influence their audience and respondents. They were just browsing, and that's all. But still, it is interesting to me that this is a very interesting mechanism of the data collection, and despite the moderate sample size, less than 200 of individuals, they actually receive very interesting results. Okay. And I think that we have the last topic that I wanted to cover, and this is what I would like to say about big data. Big data that we usually think about when we're talking about computational social science. I would like to speak a bit about science of science. To my mind, this is one of the most hot topics in computational social science at this moment. If you attend IC2S2, one of the most famous computational social science conferences, actually a lot of studies are about science of science, and you can also attend multiple workshops about science of science. And this science of science offers a quantitative understanding about scientists, about their work, about their collaboration, about their outcomes, about their discoveries. And actually, this is a unique field because a lot of information about scientists is quantified, and we can collect it very easily. I would like to speak about the difference between large and small collaboration networks and their impact on science and technology. This is, to my mind, one of the most interesting one of the most interesting studies about the science of science. Authors collected information from three very big databases: Web of Science, database of US patents and trademarks, and GitHub. And for each of the outcomes of these databases, which is a publication, so for each publication, authors computed index of disruption. Disruption index is an index which measures the impact, the novelty, the impact and the novelty of this particular paper. If individuals that you refer, if papers that refer you do not refer the papers that you refer, so this is D1, it means that your paper is something very novel. So these people, they do not associate you with your resources, with resources that you use. Otherwise, if you are one of those who receive citations as well as the sources that you cite, you have very low disruption index. And this is not a very clear definition, but actually this definition works very good. So based on this methodology, authors examined which words are most frequent for different papers, and papers with very low disruption, they're usually about confirming, demonstration, hypothesis, within, alone. So these papers are usually concentrate on the confirmation of some hypothesis and developing some research questions. In contrast, papers that have high disruption index, they're more about introduction new theories, and the most frequent words are such as change, introduce, advance, new technique, what, why. So this mechanism based on citation and references, it allows to some extent to distinguish between papers that develop already developed field and between papers that suggest something new theory, new hypothesis, and something else. And here is the examples of disruption. So here are review articles. We know this review articles have very limited novelty, and original articles that should have much more novelty. We also find here that Nobel Prize articles, they usually have very high novelty and very high disruption because they change something a lot. And based on this methodology of division, of marking papers based on their disruption, authors associate the disruption percentile, they put the position in the distribution with the team size. And the most interesting plot to my mind is A. It shows us that the disruption percentile is higher for teams of 1 to 3 persons. And then we see a decrease in the level of disruption, and we see that groups of more than 3-4 people, they decrease their disruption, Very similar picture we have also here for software and for patents, but for articles, this difference and this evolution that along with increase of team size, the disruption is decreasing, it is more pronounced. And moving further, we can also see that for the highest highest for the papers with the highest impact, for the papers that receive in top 5% papers on citations, we have the same, we have very similar picture. So if you have a very highly cited paper and you have 1 or 2 authors, this paper is very disruptive, and even with 4 authors. But then we have dramatically decrease, and we have this, nonlinear decrease. So from 4 to 5, we see the very big decrease in the percentile of disruption. So we see that groups up to 4 people, that produce very highly impact studies, they produce disruptive studies, while groups of 5 people, they already increased their disruption. So at least 3-4 people can produce something very disruptive. If you have larger group, your disruptive index and the novelty of your research has a tendency to be lower. And the conclusion of the study is that contribution of small and large teams in the creation of scientific papers and knowledge is systematically different. That small teams tend to disrupt science, they suggest new ideas, new approaches, while large teams develop recent successes, and they already have the direction of research and work in these directions. Okay, well, that's all what I wanted to say about research, and I think it would be amazing to discuss it. We also have, I also did some links in the end of my presentation that can be useful. I hope that you might find something if you would like to study networks. Great, I would be happy to answer your questions.
Great, thank you, Sonia. Thank you for such a wonderful talk with an overview of the whole, I guess, maybe not the whole field of social networks, but about different sources of data on social networks, and also for discussing this very interesting studies. So do we have any questions or comments right now? Yeah, Nora, please.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for such a great overview. I don't do social networks analysis or any research on that in that subfield, but I was wondering, do you know, maybe not now probably, but do you know any papers that kind of combine like observational studies and social network analysis as well, so that then maybe you have any like papers that also sort of complement the like a major analysis with some network visualization, and that makes it even richer in terms of like the storytelling? Because sometimes, like for instance, I'm interested in the social network analysis, but it's kind of like such a huge, like it's big and it's overwhelming. And but I understand that one like network visualization of a network, like some websites with people, how people like polarized in terms of like a use of some websites, it would be great. And yeah, and I was wondering like which environment you would suggest to use, like Python or R. Maybe Python have more libraries or R is more flexible. So I'm just very interested in these kind of technical questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. It's a great question. I put here the recommended software. Actually, I suggest, well, actually, the software that you would like to use, it depends on your research question, because, for example, such studies you can use just very simple libraries such as NetworkX in Python, or iGraph in Python and R, or SNA and networks in R. and for the coevolution of networks and behavior. And as we saw here, we should use very special software such as stochastic actor-oriented models. Overall, my recommendation is to identify what concrete do you need. In R, you have two statistical models, exponential random graph models and stochastic actor-oriented models, which allows you to identify the network patterns, such as tendency to create ties with similar others, homophily, or such as tendency to create preferential attachment ties, something like create ties with someone who is popular. And you can do it in R, and in Python you can compute a lot of statistics. You can make great visualizations, and you can also do embeddings on a network level with Stanford Snap and with Stanford Node2Vec. So I would suggest to use the software independence of your goal. I would say that if you do not have very specific question, you can use that software that you are familiar with. GEFIM is also, it is a separate program, and it is also a very nice program, which is also produces very nice plots. You can calculate basic descriptive statistics with GEFIM. If you need just very simple plots, you may use this. Well, yes. Did I answer your question, or you have?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have other questions?
I can
Yeah.
have several questions, because I've started to analyze like quite big data sets. I mean, like it was like around 1,000 person, and I ran into problem with R and visualization even in Gephi. So I don't know, maybe some advice or strategies when you have quite big data set, what you do, filter nodes to view maybe core actors or something, because it's like just a hairball of nodes and you don't understand what to really do with it. So yeah, how to start actually to see something, or should I scale it? How scale, if some suggestion?
I think it's a very good question, and I think that most of us started with this question, that I have network which is a hairball and I don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure that the network visualization is the best approach to identify some patterns. Actually, I would suggest you to think about maybe research question. Maybe you would like to associate some network parameters. So, for example, if you have some information about individuals, then you might link these parameters of individuals with the network positions, such as betweenness centrality, page rank, eigenvector centrality, closeness, a degree in degree, something like this. I would maybe do something like this. And about network visualization, I would suggest actually, here is the link, Kateta.net, and this is Catherine Agnanova. She's an expert in network visualization, and she has a very, very big and very rich tutorial on the network visualization. It is in R, but she shows how to make very great plots. Still, even on her plots, it's very difficult to find some patterns on big networks. Thus, I would suggest maybe to think more about some hypotheses and maybe to make some If you have very many links, you might also try some filters and filter individuals who are isolated, maybe filter individuals who have who are not involved in in the largest connected component, or to do something like this. Overall, usually visualizations are not quite big, and usually they're limited with 100 of nodes, I think, because larger networks are very difficult to handle. Maybe this one is a big one. Yes. And if you have any questions about, particularly network studies, you might just say a couple of words about your topic and about the data that you have, and we can suggest some hypotheses and calculations, because it's a bit difficult to suggest something, do not know the nature of the data.
Oh, it's like data from RINS database about researchers, how they published papers together, and it was we collected those data for sociologists that we surveyed. So we have some additional information about what they think about participating, what they value, what people they think are the most prominent. So I thought about maybe compare ego networks for those who are mentioned as scholars, like most prominent scholars, and compare how they are, if they are influential nodes in actual collaboration networks in paper. So because it could be that people say that we think that these are the most like most esteemed scholars in our field, but in terms of collaboration, they could have like a special role in a network. So kind of linked to those things. I thought about that. So maybe network structure can explain why people say or mention those people as most prominent or most esteemed scholars.
Well, I would say that you have a very interesting topic. You can study whether individuals, you can study their personal networks, and you can also use these approaches from these fields, from science of science, because there are very many papers about the position of the researcher in an individual network. And you can also add information. You can make the collaboration network for each individual, and you can also use information about his impact, such as citations, and then associate it with the survey outcome. I would do something like this.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's great data, and it has great potential.
Yeah, for those who didn't get it, Angelica was talking about Russian Science Citation Index. It's like Scopus or Web of Science, but like a database which indexes Russian journals. Maybe not only Russian, but
I think they're not only Russian.
yeah, but it's called Russian Science. Well, okay, yeah, just general idea is like is that it's like Scopus or Web of Science. Okay, do we have some other questions? So Nora asked something in the chat.
Data VSNR only for small networks. I'm not sure. I would say that actually, if you have a small network, it's easier to find some patterns in these networks. If you have a very big network, it isn't very easy to identify some patterns.
Oh, sorry, I was just asking about also that website that you showed us with this very beautiful networks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, would you recommend that this one is mostly to visualize smaller networks, right? Or it can handle bigger ones as well, or not?
Actually, this is a problem that, to my mind, in the majority of the most recent papers, you can find very limited amount of very big network visualization, at least in good journals, because these pictures are not informative, and you can see very limited amount of information from such visualizations. You can more information about something like the plot of relationship between the degree centrality and some outcome. I would say this. And if you would like to show some particular pattern, which is visible only on the level of the network, it might be better to show some small network, because it would be easier for you to demonstrate this pattern. But it depends on the journal, actually, a lot. In good journal, I have very limited number of big networks, because they have very limited information in these networks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone want to ask something? If not, I have a question. So, people very often say that, like, people from computational social science field often say that we can discover hidden social ties with digital traces.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel? So what's your understanding? Where are we? So on which stage are we? How do we actually did we actually got some very important insights about people actual relationships based on these digital traces, or it's because my understanding is that it's very difficult to extract some really meaningful ties from all these ties, for instance, on social media. So on Facebook, we have lots of so-called friends, right? But
Yes.
it's not easy to understand which ties are meaningful. So which are like big ties, who are the people
Strong
we
and
are,
big ties.
yeah,
Yes.
strong and big ties. So and which ties are just like we are friends with this people on Facebook, but we don't even remember that we are friends there with them. So I think that there is a special field, link prediction, right? So
Yes.
yeah, but
Yes.
but can we really are we really good at predicting these links yet, or no?
I think that we are good in it if we use not to work. My colleague, she used information about multiple relationships in enterprise social media, such as Slack, Google Calendars, and emails, and she predicted the actual collaboration ties based on this information. And these node to backend embeddings, they actually give an opportunity to get information about these actual relationships. So yes, we are moving in this direction, and we actually know more about the multiplex networks that aggregate very many different types of relationships. And this neural network approach, based on this embedding, it gives us more precise and better predictions rather than we had previously. So I would say that we are moving in this direction, and we are having better link predictions now with these node embeddings. And I would say that this is one of the hottest topics in the field of computer science. I would say that it's a very good question and very good topic.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask you just to clarify, what is node embeddings, if it's actually possible to say it?
Yeah, I'm afraid that it might be very unclear, but you might know these embeddings that Word2Vec were suggested by Word2Vec. These models that compute the in terms of this approach, for each individual, you represent his or her position as a vector. Word2Vec, it represents the position of a word in a as a vector. And then you just compute the distance between two vectors. And this distance would represent the distance between, for example, two words. For example, we know that the difference between words king and queen is the same as the difference between words man and woman. And so it shows us the position of the world in n-dimensional space. And it was suggested by Google. Lisa knows more about particularly Word2Vec and Word2Vec. And Word2Vec, it was suggested by Jure Leskovec from Stanford, who is studying networks. And he suggested to use very simple, very similar methodology, this based on Word2Vec, on this embedding space, to study the networks. And in frames of this approach, for each individual, you have a vector. And for nodes who are closer to each other, you would have a shorter distance between them. And thus, we might suggest that the probability of the tie formation for link prediction is associated with this distance between these two nodes. And it works for multiple sources of data, but it's emergent field in network science, and we should study it to be good network scientists.
Yeah. Thank you, Sonia. So, are there any other comments, suggestions, questions? Okay. So, and we also have only 5 minutes left for the break. So, I suggest that we stop here. Thank you very much. I hope that you will share your slides with us, and maybe, yeah, we will upload the video on the site.
Yes, you can upload it. Sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will stop.